Listen closely to the sound of a city that still believes its own order is unbreakable. The iron clink of gill doors at dawn, the wet hush of the Ill River crawling under bridges, the slap of bread dough from the baker's paddles, the muttered bargains of merchants pinching copper in the market square. Strasbourg, July 1518, heat-trembling air, dust like ash on the tongue, bells counting the hours as if time itself were a chain you could wrap around the day and hold in place. And then a single link breaks. A woman steps from a narrow alley into the light and begins to dance. Not the braided joy of a harvest reel, not the courtly figures of a noble hall. Her feet hammer the cobbles as if trying to beat through stone and escape the earth. Her hands move without grace, without pattern, as if someone else were pulling tendons from behind the skin. People smile because that is what people do when they don't yet understand danger. A drunk, a vagrant, a grief-struck wife. A butcher's boy imitates her flailing arms and gets cuffed by his master. A priest watches, lips moving. Someone tries to catch her wrist and she twists free like a hooked fish. She collapses and a small wave of relief rustles the crowd. Then she drags in a breath like a sob and rises, and the feet go again, beating, beating, beating. By noon a ring forms around her, a living fence of curiosity and dread. By evening the ring is a wall, and on the wall are faces that hunger for a reason. The heat holds, a thumb set on the city's throat. Lanterns bruise the air with their oily glow. The woman's dress clings dark with sweat. Her heels split. Blood makes her footprints bloom raw on the cobbles, red flowers that open and are immediately crushed under the next step. She falls and is carried. No, not carried. She writhes from the hands that would lift her and staggers back into the square as if the very open space is a magnet buried in the stone. At some point, a name floats up and sinks again. Was she the wife who lost a child last winter when the river's edge, iced, treacherous and thin? Was she the woman whose husband works the tanneries, breathing in the same rot that softens hides and lungs alike? Or is she simply nobody with a face you would forget, even if she were not dancing herself out of personhood? She becomes a story even while still alive, the city's tongue trying to make sense by wrapping a name around a wound. Morning finds her still moving, and morning finds not one woman dancing but three. The vendor who sneered the day before has his daughter by the shoulders now, shaking her, pleading. She answers in howls, knees jacking upward as if strings were tied to them and someone above were testing the knots. By the second sunset, there are a dozen by the week's end. No one is sure, because numbers blur when fear outpaces counting. 24? 5? 50? They pour into the square and along the lanes that feed it, bodies scything through the heat, faces emptying of everything but the terror of not being able to stop. The city has rules for hunger, rules for flood, rules for the pestilence that swells buboes and empties houses. There are fasts to keep heaven sweet. There are sandbags for water and lime for graves. But what rule fits this? Physicians with velvet caps arrive, eyes narrowed with professional certainty that wobbles as soon as they stand close enough to smell the dancers. Sweat, iron, sour breath, meat cooking itself from the inside. Healers prod pulses and peer at tongues. They prescribe rest. The dancers cannot rest. They prescribe cold cloths. The dancers fling them away. They prescribe prayer. The prayers fall like dead birds at the dancers' feet. Strasbourg is not a village that can hide a secret. Its market square is a bowl that gathers sound, the grind of a millstone, the thump of a farmer's sack, the sudden scrape of a chair. Now the bowl brims with a harsher music. Drummers appear because someone decides, with that particular civic logic born of panic. that like cures like. If the body is trapped in rhythm, perhaps you can coax it into a gentler one.
A stage is thrown together. Rough planks, sawn hands, splinters under frantic thumbs, and musicians mounted, their faces pale under the paint of lamp smoke. The first bow is drawn, the first drumhead struck, and the dancers surge as if the sound were a lash. A woman sobs with joy because she thinks for an instant the motions align with the tune, and therefore maybe she is not possessed but merely caught in a dance she can now follow.
10 seconds later she is screaming, feet thudding out a pattern no musician knows. Behind shutters, families hold counsel. Mothers hide knives because the thought forms that ending a life might be a mercy, and they fear their own hands. Fathers tie linen around their daughters' ankles as if binding the instrument might mute the music. Boys climb the cathedral steps to watch, thrilled and sick, learning how easily a human can turn into a spectacle, learning how brief the distance is between witness and participant.
A beggar drags himself to the square hoping for alms and ends up on his back, limbs threshing, a fish thrown from water. It is whispered that to watch too long is to feel a heat in your legs, that the dance is a seed entering through the eyes and sprouting in the muscle.
The council meets in a room that smells of parchment and wax, and a sour thread of old wine. Men with rings draw lines on maps that do not show blood. Ordinances are discussed, ban gatherings, shutter taverns, threaten fines. Someone with a soft voice suggests a shrine to St. Vitus. Send the afflicted to a holy place, promise offerings, beg intercession. Someone louder snaps that the city must not be seen to truck with superstition. The same man later secretly presses a coin into a minor cleric's hand and asks him to light a candle anyway. Hypocrisy is just fear in a better coat. On the second Sabbath, a procession forms of its own accord, not ordered by priest or council, but pushed into shape by desperation's weather. Women walk with their hands on the shoulders of women. Men walk with their eyes fixed on the middle distance, as if staring down an enemy. Children trot, bewildered, at adult knees. And in the stream of their motion the dancers jerk and buck, like the trapped, like the drowned. Bells ring, the sky presses low and white, thunder mutters somewhere far enough to ignore but not far enough to forget. A girl with hair like scrubbed straw tries to sing to her mother a lullaby the mother once used while shelling peas, but the melody derails under her lurching breath and becomes a moan. It is not that people die. Strasbourg is used to death, has furniture for it, drawers in the mind where mourning goes. It is the wrongness of how. A baker's apprentice bites through his tongue mid-spasm and drowns on the blood that should have stayed in his veins. An old cobbler's heart rockets and seizes like a horse run into a wall. A young mother stumbles and smashes her head on the corner of a cart. Her body keeps shuddering long after she has ceased to be inside it. Some dancers collapse into a twitching sleep that is not sleep, a black pool in which they do not rest, but only pause. Some crawl until their knees are meet, and then, astonishingly, stand to dance on the ruins. In edge streets the quiet is worse. Neighbours listen to the square's pounding echo and try to stitch their evenings into something like normal. A pot boils over, and nobody curses because speech feels blasphemous against that other language outside. Thud, rasp, whimper, drum. A cat steps on a fallen fig and leaves little purple suns across a threshold. Somewhere, a baby laughs, not because anything is funny, but because babies are still their own kingdoms. 3 women weep at the sound in gratitude and terror. The city is learning a new grammar. Even silence now conjugates around the dance. Rumours breed as fast as fear. The rye is tainted, the air is cursed. The devil walks with hooves muffled in velvet. A goldsmith swears he saw a woman's shadow keep dancing after her body fell. A washerwoman says the river ran backward for a breath, then remembered itself. A clerk claims he counted a heartbeat that belonged to no one in the room. This is how the mind bargains with the incomprehensible. It gives it mirrors and masks and asks it to choose one. Somewhere in this there is still the first woman, though the crowd has now chewed her down into a symbol. Someone thinks they recognize the tilt of her head and calls out a name. She turns, eyes glass blank, and for a slice of a second, something like recognition or terror or pleading moves behind them. Then the wave of motion picks her up again and dashes her forward. If you could take the city by the shoulders, you might shake it and say, "Look, look carefully. These are not demons. These are your neighbors, the same hands that mended your cloak, the same teeth that laughed at your joke, the same back that bent in the next furrow over." But the city will not be shaken awake. It is too busy dreaming this nightmare with open eyes. Toward the month's end, the heat turns vicious, meat stinks faster, bread goes stale between oven and stall. The dancers' footprints blacken, then fade, then are renewed. Physicians change their explanations to fit their failures. Priests change their sermons to fit their fear. The council's ordinance about music is quietly reversed because, whatever the intention, the result is worse. Fiddles scrape the air raw, drums drive hearts like nails, flutes braid through the bodies in a high keening that feels like wire through bone. The stage is removed, then rebuilt, because panic cannot hold a decision steady. A merchant proposes exporting the afflicted to a nearby village. He calls it charity, but his hand covers the ledger where he has calculated how much business the spectacle costs him each day. And then, on an afternoon when the light seems to tilt a degree and the city feels pushed half an inch off its foundations, something shifts that no one can name. The dancers do not lessen, they intensify, as if some unseen conductor has lifted his arms for a final movement. Witnesses, if that is the word for those who will never again be mere witnesses, will later disagree on what began it. A trumpet? A scream? A child's laughter slicing thin and bright through the roar? What they agree on is the impression, sudden and unanimous, that the dance has decided on them rather than the other way around. That whatever agency remained has been confiscated. Even the ones who felt immune, the ironmongers, the men who swing hammers and believe muscle is a ward against all delicate evils, find their calves cramping in sympathetic rhythm.
Night leans in, torches gutter and recover. The sky, bruised yellow near the horizon, lets go a single star that looks more like a nail head than a light. And in that glow you can see the truth that will keep you from sleep for years. The line between the afflicted and the watching is only a line because both sides agree, for now, to pretend it is.
A man steps forward to help a dancer he thinks is his brother. He is wrong. The face is a stranger's, but the mistake does not matter because in the next breath his own feet begin their separate stamping, and the question of brotherhood is solved by multiplication. If you are looking for an ending, you will not find it here. This is only the city's first intake of breath before it begins to drown. Tomorrow, the council will double its orders, the priests will redouble their pleas, the musicians will be told to stop and then told to start again, and a road out of Strasbourg will seem to promise safety to anyone with legs steady enough to flee. But tonight, the square is a furnace and the bodies in it are the fuel, and the sound they make is a hymn in a language no one chose to learn. Somewhere a mother holds her still sleeping child and whispers to the dark that there must be a reason, because reasons are the last bridges left when the ground goes. The dark, for now, does not answer. And beneath all this, something older than the city opens one patient eye. The thing that opened its eye does not blink when the sun returns. It only watches as men pretend their signatures can stitch a wound in the world. Morning breaks like glass over Strasbourg. The councillors arrive with the look of men who did not sleep but shaved anyway, scraping faces to make order out of their own fear. They pass through corridors sweet with beeswax and ink, and step into a chamber where maps hang on the walls like tanned hides. A clerk reads the ordinances from a sheet that quivers in his hands. No gatherings after sundown, no tavern song, remove the stage, dismiss the drummers, compel the afflicted to rest, levy fines against those who gawk and those who cheer. Even as the words leave his mouth, the square answers with a muffled roar, a sound like grain poured into a wooden chest, constant, granular, impossible to stop once begun. What the council cannot hear through the stone is how the roar is made, heels pounding, breath tearing, teeth biting through the soft underside of the tongue. They vote, they stamp seals, and the city does not change. A physician named Kopp, thin, fastidious, proud of his Latin, insists the blood has been heated by unseasonable weather and melancholy humours, that a calculated regimen of cooling draughts, cold compresses and quiet will bring the body back to its senses. He writes out dosages in numbers whose loops look like the tails of frightened mice. A priest named Matthias speaks softly of St. Vitus and the old fear. Anger the saint, and he sets your limbs to the saint's own measure until you beg for mercy. A midwife named Elsa, who has not been invited but has learned how to enter any room by walking as if she has been called, says nothing. She smells the square on the councillor's clothes and knows that what is in the air will not be written down in time to stop it. Outside, the drummers are driven away by order and by cudgel, and for a blessed hour the square is only bodies and breath and the scrape of souls. But it turns out the drums were not the fire. They were kindling. Without them the dancers do not stop. They grow frantic, as if deprived of something to fight against. Heads begin to crack on stone more frequently. A boy's shoulder unhooks from its socket with a wet sound, not meant for daylight. The men who dismantle the stage do it in jolts. Work, look up, because every few breaths a scream turns the neck by itself. In the cathedral nave, incense pretends to be stronger than sweat. Father Matthias speaks of penitence and pilgrim ways. He sets a reliquary on the altar that gleams as if light were a liquid caught in a cup. Those who can still kneel, kneel. Those whose legs twitch without permission stand in the back and rock in their shame. A hymn struggles through the nave like a wounded animal, moving, stopping, gasping, moving again. When the last note shakes itself apart, two men are carried down the aisle by friends, bodies jerking in the respectable cadence of a church march. In a lane beside the tanners, Kopp's apprentices bind a woman to a bed with linen strips, measuring their worth in knots. She looks at them with an expression that is not anger or fear, but pity. Then the trembling climbs her throat, plucks her jaw like a string, and her eyes roll as if to keep the whites from being scorched. The bed rungs creak in time with the square's distant thud. Kopp arrives furious at the apprentices, at the woman, at the heat, at the inability of doctrine to hold. He pries open her mouth with a wooden wedge, pours his draught, commands the body to obey the recipe. For a minute, the limbs go quiet. He feels a flush of vindication. A fly lands on his lip, and he does not brush it away because triumph tastes sweeter when you refuse to be seen fussing. Then the woman arches so violently that one linen strip frays, then another, and the bed slides across the floor by inches as if pushed by a tide. Elsa steps from the doorway. No one saw her arrive, and cuts the remaining bindings. If she is to break, Let it be on her feet where the bones are meant to take it, she says. And when the woman staggers into the alley, she follows 2 steps behind, eyes on the ground, to see where the blood begins. Because blood will begin. The market tries for a morning to remember itself. A cheesemonger arranges his rounds as if order were hunger's favourite sauce. A fishwife sets her eels on wet leaves and croons to them in a language made of spit and patience. But buyers come in starts, flinching at the square's invisible weather, and when a basket spills there is no curse, only a flurry of fingers scrabbling, as if the noise of falling fruit could turn into that other noise any second, and you must collect every plum before the sound transforms. A girl in red clogs watches too long and begins to sway. Her mother slaps her hard across the mouth, then kisses the print she left with shaking lips. By noon, no gathering has been revised to no gathering unless it is a procession. Father Matthias wins that particular fight by losing it. He does not argue the letter of the ordinance, but admits that the soul sometimes chooses the music of surrender. He calls for a penitent march to the chapel of St. Vitus beyond the city, a pilgrimage of shame and hope combined. The afflicted led under a canopy for shade, their feet shod in red shoes, because red is the colour the old books say the saint notices. The council hates the superstition and loves the plan. It means the square will empty, the merchants will return, the city can pretend to be a city again, while the woods take the problem someplace green where the sound can be absorbed by leaves. That afternoon, cobblers are impressed into service. Leather is dyed in troughs like blood watered down. Nail heads are hammered into soles, small bright stars that will hide in dust. The sound of the nails is almost a music. Elsa moves among the benches, her hands quick, her voice low. A strap looser for the swollen foot, a seam softened with tallow, a blessing named a suggestion, because blessings make certain men flinch. Cop refuses to stitch leather onto madness. He writes letters to a university patron instead, framing the catastrophe in phrases that might purchase him reputation, if not results. On a street that leads to the square, a woman selling amulets does the best trade of her life. Bits of cloth supposed to have touched saints, small bones of animals renamed with better pedigrees, twisted ribbons that used to be a bride's scrip, and are now the hinge on which a child's future swings. She knows she is lying and swears she will undo each lie with a prayer when the money is counted. She also knows that when a river overflows, you do not discuss philosophy with the water. Dusk pries the heat off the stones. The square presses inward on itself like a bruise. Lanterns are raised. The afflicted thrash in a wide, sleepless circle, and men with poles try to keep the ring open, to give the dancers room enough not to murder each other inadvertently. The poles make a fence that moves. Fences that move are not fences. A grandmother with a spine like a question mark is pulled through by accident. She beats at the air with her kerchief, and for a moment stands at the very edge between watching and being watched. One of the poles bows toward her, and she is lifted back into the safer shade. She clutches the kerchief as if it is a proof of citizenship returned at the border. For God and council alike, the night is a ledger. Father Matthias counts souls aloud as if naming were a sacrament of resistance. 40 and 2, 40 and 3. Though he knows some have slipped away down alleys to dance in private shame. Cop counts symptoms because symptoms are coins you can stack. Tremor, pallor, tachycardia, syncope, petechiae. Elsa counts the faces she knows and the ones she does not, and finds that the arithmetic of grief uses numbers she has not learned.
A rumour arrives, panting. A miller's wife delivered a stillborn child while her legs jerked in the rhythm of the square. The midwife could not keep the baby from the floor. The rumour is true. The rumour then grows roots. The child twitched once after it was gone. The child opened its mouth to bite the air. The child lifted its hand in the saint's own measure. These are lies grafted onto a truth to make it bear fruit that matches the season. In the dark, a voice. It is the bread.
No one hears it because the square is a forge and the hammers are up. In the kitchens, loaves cool in rows like sleeping apostles. Mould hides as velvet in the folds of rye. Rats practice their own processions along the rafters, tails writing ciphers only they can read. A baker's boy scratches his forearm and tells his mother the flour itches this year. She tells him not to scratch and keep sifting because the oven does not ask after the health of wheat. Dawn edges in thin as a blade. The procession gathers, hedged by guards who will later swear they were there for dignity and safety, not coercion. Red shoes are buckled onto bleeding feet, a colour that in the first light looks almost brown, almost old, almost mercy. Father Matthias holds a cross, high enough for the eyes to choose it if they can. Some do, some don't. Elsa loops a length of cloth around the waist of a woman who can still understand a knot, ties herself to the other end, tests the tension with a tug. Cop stands back at the fountain, looking haggard and clean, and wonders whether he should go. Then he remembers that travel would smudge his notes and stays. The column moves. It is not beautiful. It is not even solemn. It is a cart with wheels of different sizes, a song sung in too many keys, a body whose spine has seized in two places. But it moves, and the relief that runs through the square is as shameful as it is honest. Let them carry their noise into the trees. Let the saint take the debt. Let the river forget the taste of iron. Outside the gate, the road turns to dust that takes prints as greedily as parchment takes ink. The dancers stagger, some falling, some dragged, some pulled upright by a yank that leaves the shoulder pink like something skinned. Birds lift from a field as if the procession were a rope pulled under them. A man breaks from the line, dazzled by the idea that the ditch will cradle him into stillness. Two guards retrieve him, gentle, because the day is long and roughness spends strength. They pass a granary where sacks of rye sit fat and oblivious. A breeze carries a smell that is not wrong exactly, only too sweet for morning. The chapel waits in a grove where the leaves make a roof, and the air tastes of damp wood and old prayers. Inside, a wooden St. Vitus stands with a smile that could be blessing or smirk. The carver was careful not to take a position. The first dancers to reach the threshold lurch, as if their bodies cannot decide whether the saint demands bowing or kicks. Several do both. Red shoes scuff the stone. Coins ring like small bells on the altar step. Father Matthias begins the litany. Elsa tightens the knot around her waist and whispers to the woman she's tethered to, "If there is a door, we'll find it." The woman grins through a grimace, a ghastly flash of humour still alive under the ruin, and says, "If there is no door, we'll walk through the wall." Behind them, the procession's tail still spills from the trees, and behind the tail, the city still stands like a question pushed into brick. Cop's voice will later argue that this was theatre, that saints do not fix humours, that red is not pharmacology. He will not be wrong. He will only be insufficient. Because as the prayers drone, and the flies settle, and the shoes squeak, and the bodies jerk, and the grove walls hold the sound like a cup, something else arrives. Not a miracle, not a cure, but a pattern. The tremor in three women matches, the pause before collapse, spreads like a taut refrain. The fear in the faces of the watchers, for a moment, becomes unanimous and therefore almost calm. It is at that moment, when sameness begins to show itself in the chaos, that a baker bends to tie his sandal and notices for the first time the fine black dust the rye has left on the laces. He rubs it away with a thumb. Then he looks at the thumb. Then he tastes the air and thinks absurdly of metal. And in the half-light of the chapel, as Matthias's voice rises and the red shoes scrape, and the old saint smiles his careful smile, a question starts to form that has nothing to do with demons at all. The question that begins in the chapel does not end there. It clings to the baker's skin like the dust itself, black, fine, hungry. He wipes his hand on his tunic and pretends he did not notice, because noticing is a kind of crime when the city already has too many culprits. But once you have seen, you cannot unsee. The smell of rye thickens in his nose until it feels like ash, like a field already burned before the sickle comes. The procession stumbles on for hours. They circle the chapel, red shoes flashing like wounds in motion. Father Matthias reads his litanies with a voice that cracks, and every crack is a doorway for doubt. He sees it in the eyes of his flock. Their prayers are not rising, they are collapsing inward. The afflicted twitch and shriek under the wooden saint's indifferent smile. A boy collapses, foam at his lips, chest hammering against ribs that bend too far. Two men drag him to the altar, as if laying an offering. When he dies, they leave him there for the saint to judge. The flies are quicker. Elsa watches. Her tethered woman jerks and sobs, half humming, half howling, and Elsa feels the tug in her own waist each time the spasms rise. She speaks softly, not prayers but reminders. Breathe, rest if you can, hold to me. She has delivered babies in barns, dressed wounds in ditches, pressed linen against plague sores until her fingers stank for weeks. But she has never seen madness that sweats from the skin and bleeds from the eyes. By dusk the chapel reeks of bodies. Father Matthias calls for more prayer, more offering, more faith. Elsa calls for water, cloth, rest. Between them stretches the city's choice, salvation by ritual or survival by hands. But the dancers do not care which banner flies above their torment. They only know the rhythm inside them, merciless, pounding. When the column returns to Strasbourg days later, it is thinner. Some were buried by the road, others abandoned in the woods when their spasms broke them. Yet the dance is not broken. In fact, it spreads faster. The market square seethes again, filled with new faces, new bodies, jerking to a song no ears can hear. The council despairs. They whisper of closing the gates, of burning the afflicted alive to cauterize the city's wound. But whispers are all they have left.
Authority is paper, and paper burns in fire.
It is then that the rumors of bread begin. The baker's boy coughs at night, muttering of shadows writhing in the flour sacks. A miller claims his rye smells too sweet, too sharp, and that his wife's skin turned black where she needed it. Kopp, the physician, dismisses it as gossip. Mold cannot drive men mad, he insists. Madness comes from the stars, from the balance of bile and blood, from the weakness of women. But Elsa remembers children's tongues, blackened by spoiled loaves, remembers cramps after famine harvests. She knows what bodies know, and bodies do not lie. Still, the city prefers its demons. Demons are easier to burn than bread.
Night after night, the square becomes a theatre of damnation. Torches paint the dancers in fever colours, yellow, orange, blood red. The sound is unbearable, hundreds of feet pounding, bones breaking, voices shrieking until they shred into silence. Witnesses say they saw mothers drop their infants to join the circle, fathers abandon their sons, old men suddenly surging with youth as if hell itself lent them strength.
And always the end is the same. Collapse. A body convulses one last time, a heart bursts, a skull cracks on stone, and yet the survivors rise again, driven by a will not their own. They cannot stop. They do not stop. The council grows desperate. Some call for exile, some for execution. Father Matthias insists on more shrines, more penance, more relics. Elsa insists on less music, less fever, less bread. No one listens. To admit bread could kill is to admit that the city's very life, the harvest, the ovens, the holy meal itself, is poisoned. The truth, therefore, must be silenced. But truth has a way of seeping like mould through flour. Soon whispers run through the taverns, it is the bread. The bread eats us from within. And fear of famine collides with fear of plague. For if the bread is cursed, then hunger is the only cure. By late August, Strasbourg is no longer a city. It is a wound. Its streets are slick with sweat and blood, its markets empty, its priests hoarse, its physicians mocked. The people look at each other with suspicion, as if madness might be contagious through the eyes, through the breath, through a word spoken too close. Neighbors bolt doors. Families tie their children to beds. And still, the sound of dancing echoes in the dark, relentless. One night, Elsa walks the edge of the square. She sees faces she knows twisted into masks. She sees strangers, eyes rolled white. She sees children, their thin arms flailing like broken birds. And she sees the first woman, the one who began it all, still moving, still bleeding, her body ruined but her feet unbroken. Elsa cannot look away. The woman's gaze finds hers for an instant. There is no plea in it, no rage, only a bottomless emptiness, as if everything that once made her human has been scraped away, leaving only the dance. Elsa shudders. For the first time in her life, she wishes for demons. Demons can be cast out. But this looks like despair itself, made flesh and rhythm. And despair, Elsa knows, cannot be exorcised. It must be endured. The night deepens. The drums return, though no one summoned them. And with every beat, Strasbourg beats too, a city turned into a single heart, pounding itself toward death. But somewhere, in the silence between beats, a question lingers, whispering through the streets like smoke. What if it is not God, not demons, not madness? What if it is us, our hunger, our grief, our bread, that has made us dance? By September, Strasbourg is no longer a city but a fever dream. Its streets smell of heat-soured sweat, of bread gone rancid, of piss that steams against stone where bodies collapse. The square is a wound that never scabs, and every day the wound grows wider. What began as one woman jerking against her will has become hundreds, then more, so many that witnesses stop counting. And still, the rhythm does not tire. The council is fractured. In the council hall, where beeswax once softened the air, now the stench of panic drowns every breath. One man cries for exile, drive them into the fields and bar the gates, let them thrash among the wheat until heaven or hell takes them. Another demands fire. A pyre cleanses better than prayer. Father Matthias demands relics, shrines, pilgrimages, until the city itself is nothing but a chapel of St. Vitus. Kopp demands experiments, bleedings, leechings, tinctures of vinegar and mercury, anything to preserve the illusion that the sickness obeys reason. Elsa does not attend the council. She knows reason is no longer welcome there. The dancers do not wait for decrees. They swarm the market square, spill into the alleys, infect the courtyards of the wealthy and the cellars of the poor. They dance in the shadow of the cathedral, their jerking limbs mocking the grace of saints carved in stone. They dance until their joints splinter, until their ribs crack against their own lungs. When one falls, another rises. When one dies, two more begin. The city has become an endless procession without music, a carnival without joy. Children stare from shuttered windows, their faces pale moons above the darkness. Some clap their hands against their thighs, imitating the rhythm, until their mothers drag them away in terror. Men lock wives in cellars, wives tie husbands to beams. Still the dance spreads, as if it does not need contagion by touch or sight, but by despair. And despair Strasbourg has in abundance. The famine has emptied pantries, the river runs low, its water thick with summer's rot. Bread grows blacker in its corners, sweeter in its stench. People eat because hunger is stronger than rumor. They eat because the body demands, even when the body is the enemy. And after they eat, some dance, and after they dance, they die. One evening, the council orders guards to herd the afflicted into barns outside the walls. Wagons creak with twitching cargo, red shoes scraping wood as bodies convulse. Some are chained, some tied, some left loose to batter themselves against planks. Witnesses say the sound of the wagons was worse than the square. Muffled thuds, strangled moans, wood cracking under skulls. By dawn, half the barns were silent. The other half still shook with frenzy. The guards, pale and hollow-eyed, begged not to be sent again. The council, with ink-stained fingers, signed another order anyway. In the cathedral, Father Matthias calls the dance a punishment for hidden sin. His sermons grow darker, his words like knives. You who watch and feel safe, beware. Sin will find your feet too, and you will dance with them into the pit. The faithful cry, beat their breasts, give coins until the coffers bulge. Yet even some priests mutter in private that no God of mercy would demand such agony, but the Church has no room for such doubts. Better to name it divine wrath than admit ignorance. Kopp, meanwhile, grows gaunt. His notes multiply into piles, lists of symptoms, guesses, failures. He writes of fevers without heat, madness without delusion, death without wound. He tries tinctures of mint, of camphor, of wormwood. Nothing works. He bleeds a boy until his veins collapse, then watches, horrified, as the boy staggers upright and dances again. For the first time in his life, Kopp begins to pray, but not to God, to reason itself, that it might return. Elsa moves through the streets at night, lantern in hand. She no longer tries to bind the dancers or cool their skin. She tends only to the survivors, the children left behind when parents collapse, the hungry who no longer trust bread. She whispers to them, "It is not demons, not saints. It is the earth itself poisoned in our mouths." Some listen, some laugh bitterly. But Elsa speaks anyway, because silence is another kind of death. The square is now so choked with bodies that torches must be held aloft to keep the living from trampling the dying. Witnesses say the cobblestones shine dark with blood, that rats feed openly, fearless of men. Merchants abandon stalls. Dogs scavenge where loaves once lay. The dance has devoured the city's heart, and Strasbourg beats only in spasms. And then silence, not complete, not lasting, but sudden enough to freeze the breath. One night in early September, the dancers collapse together, as if the string holding them all has been cut. They lie scattered like fallen soldiers. Some rise again, weak, twitching. Most do not. The torches burn over stillness, and for the first time in weeks the air is only air. The city does not cheer. It waits, fearing the silence is only an inhale before the next scream. The council waits with its pens, the priests wait with their relics. Kopp waits with his ink. Elsa waits with her hands, but the silence holds. Day after day, the frenzy does not return. The dancers lie in shallow graves, their bodies too many for proper rites. The survivors limp through streets that still smell of iron and mould. The market opens again, cautiously. though buyers eye the bread with suspicion. The council declares the crisis ended. Father Matthias proclaims victory of the saint. Kopp claims exhaustion of humours. Elsa says nothing, yet everyone knows nothing has been solved. The plague has not been cured, only spent. The memory festers under the skin of Strasbourg, waiting. For weeks the square is scrubbed with lye. Blood seeps from the stones no matter how much water is poured. Mothers whisper warnings to children. Do not sing too loudly, do not stare too long, do not eat bread gone black. Men speak of leaving the city, but few do. Poverty chains heavier than fear. And always, in the distance, there is the faintest echo, the ghost of a rhythm, as if the stones themselves remember. The forgotten plague is not forgotten yet. It lingers in eyes that cannot close at night, in dreams of twitching limbs, in the weight of shoes that suddenly feel too heavy. The dance has ended, or has it only paused? The silence of Strasbourg in late 1518 was not peace. It was the silence of a battlefield when the last cries have guttered out, when crows hesitate to land because even they suspect the ground might still move. For 6 weeks the city had been a theatre of horror, its square a furnace of flesh and rhythm. And then, nothing. Bodies lay still. Feet stopped. The sound that had hammered the city's nights into terror evaporated as if it had never been. But absence is not healing. Absence is only another shape of presence. The council called it deliverance. Edicts were proclaimed that Saint Vitus had shown mercy at last, appeased by shrines and shoes, by coins poured onto altars, slick with sweat. Father Matthias thundered his triumph from the pulpit, his voice shaking the nave, declaring that faith had defeated frenzy. The relics were paraded, kissed, crowned in garlands. For weeks the church bells rang longer than usual, as if to drown out memory with bronze. But behind closed doors, no one believed. Survivors limped through streets with eyes glazed, as if half their soul had remained in the square. Children woke screaming, their legs kicking against blankets. Men who had danced until their bones cracked now walked stiff as carved wood. Women whispered of sudden bleeding, of wombs turned barren, of milk gone sour in their breasts. Kopp took notes in his cramped script, pages piling with words he would never dare publish: madness without reason, death without wound, hunger feeding on hunger. He wrote that perhaps the very bread of Strasbourg had been cursed by a sickness, too small to see that mould had crept into the loaves, laced every mouthful with madness. But he did not dare speak it. To accuse bread was to accuse life itself. Elsa alone whispered the truth aloud, though only to those who would hear. She sat at the bedsides of widows and orphans and said, "It was not God's wrath. It was not demons, it was us. Our fields, our harvest, our hunger. The sickness was in our food, and our despair gave it power." Most turned away. It was easier to believe in curses than in bread. Bread could be blessed, bread could be broken. Bread was the body of Christ himself. To think that bread had killed them was a heresy too cruel to bear. And so they clung to demons, to saints, to anything that explained without cutting so deep. The square was scrubbed until the stone cracked. Lime was poured into gutters, incense burned in every corner. Still people swore the smell remained, a sweetness like overripe fruit, a stench of sweat and iron. Rats were hunted, stray dogs slaughtered, but the memory of frenzy could not be driven out. At night, some swore they heard it, the faint shuffle of feet, the scrape of nails against cobble, the whisper of a rhythm too soft to be natural. And when they listened too long, their calves twitched. The council begged silence. "Let this not be spoken of," they commanded. "Let it be buried with the dead." But Strasbourg could not forget. The city walked with a limp now, its breath forever uneven. Mothers hushed their children when they sang too wildly. Merchants eyed bread with suspicion before eating. Lovers watched each other's feet for the smallest tremor. And yet, the strangest wound was not fear. It was shame. Because in the darkest nights, the witnesses admitted to themselves something unspeakable, that for a moment, watching the dancers, they too had felt the urge, a heat in their legs, a pulse under their skin, a temptation to surrender, to let despair carry them until they were no longer responsible for their own lives. Madness is terrible, but it is also seductive. To dance until death is at least to move without choice, to give oneself wholly to something greater than the endless grind of hunger and plague and war. Elsa saw it in their eyes. She did not condemn them. She only said, "We are weaker than we think. That is why the madness found us." Years passed. Strasbourg rebuilt its markets, baked new bread, baptized new children. The plague of dancing faded from speech, from chronicles, from history. Only fragments remained, lines in dusty manuscripts, whispers in cloisters, half-remembered warnings in kitchens. And then, even those fell silent. The world preferred forgetting. But history is not so merciful. Even centuries later, the questions linger like ghosts. Why did hundreds dance to their deaths? Was it ergot in the rye, a fungus whispering madness into their blood? Was it mass hysteria, the body rebelling against famine and fear? Was it demons, saints, curses? Or was it something worse, the proof that despair itself is contagious, that hopelessness can become a plague as deadly as fire or pestilence?
And what is most terrifying, that it ended without reason. No cure, no miracle, no revelation. The madness rose, devoured, and then vanished, leaving silence. Which means it can rise again.
Even now, in moments of chaos, when hunger gnaws, when fear spreads, when despair takes root, listen closely. In the corner of your hearing, you may catch it, a faint, relentless rhythm. The echo of Strasbourg, the echo of bodies moving without will, without rest, without end. A plague of dancing madness is forgotten, and yet it waits, because what began once can begin again. And when it does, will we still call it madness, or will we admit it was always inside us,